The pharmaceutical space has historically been an exciting area for small cap investors, and there are signs that perhaps this area may even increase in importance following the decisions made by some of these larger pharmaceutical businesses to actually scale back their research and development expenditure. And one of the reasons for that is because innovation in this field is mainly driven by smaller companies. There's a massive amount of expense to maintain a research and development arm of a business. Over 60% of the drug approvals now are actually originating from smaller players outside of the top 30 pharmaceutical companies. Accordingly, larger pharma businesses like AstraZeneca, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, they've actually been more active acquiring smaller companies with compounds already established that are further progressed along the drug development timeline and with a lot of that failure risk negated. The good news for investors is that an increase to the number of scientific breakthroughs, coupled with supportive drug regulators, are actually accelerating development of new medicines. And in fact, in the last 5 years alone, we've seen enormous leaps in treatments of multiple diseases. To give you an example, there were 18 new molecular entities approved by the FDA in 2007. That jumped to 30 in 2011, and we're now up to 45 in 2015. 2018, I would imagine, is going to be bigger still. Success in these drug trials can result in significant improvements for shareholders along the journey. In the case of Pharma, a company that we've backed as Shard Capital numerous times in the past, the shares have now begun to bear fruit. And although the final results of the phase 3 trials for their autoimmune drug Lupuzor aren't actually expected until later this quarter, the trials have been progressing well, and all of the trial updates along the way have been positive. So I think a combination of anticipation buying and also reassurances from the company have pushed the share price up to a high of £1.93 from 43p in September. Another one to look out for is Motif Bio. We're all familiar with the reduction in effectiveness of antibiotics due to them getting into the water table, etc. And if you go to your doctor's surgery now, there is a growing reluctance to actually prescribe antibiotics to patients to fight common illnesses. And there's a real need, and an urgent need at that, to commercialise new antibiotics to actually keep pace with the development of drug resistance. Phase 3 trials for Motif have now been completed and they've achieved the desired top-line data, so they should have an application actually submitted to the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, by early 2018. It's no longer just blockbuster drug targets that actually capture the imagination of investors. Orphan drugs are drugs that have been developed specifically to treat rare medical conditions. Both the US and the EU now have put several incentives in place to actually encourage drug companies to develop these orphan drugs that otherwise wouldn't be financially viable because of the amount of time that is taken and money to actually discover them. One of our investments, Amrit Pharma, which trades under the symbol AMYT, is actually waiting for an interim analysis readout in the first half of this year for Episalvan. Now they actually have already approved that for phase 3 trials, but they think it will be an effective treatment for epidermolysis bullosa, which is a rare and severe skin disorder that typically affects young children. It causes the skin layers and internal body linings to separate, and it's pretty graphic, but there's no approved treatment, and this is horrific for these people. Merger and acquisition activity has been buoyant in this sector. There's been over $12.5 billion spent by larger pharmaceutical companies on orphan drugs alone in 2015. Now that's just with drugs at phase 3 or filed stage. 3 years on, chances are that's going to be significantly higher. Now, clearly these pharmaceutical businesses aren't for widows and orphans. A lot of these companies have single drug exposure, and realistically they can drop to near enough zero on failed drug tests. Now that does sound pretty extreme, but it's a reality. That being said, the patient investors amongst us can be rewarded with significant multiple-fold returns, as demonstrated by Pharma within the last couple of months. For those that would like exposure to this potentially lucrative but notoriously difficult investment sector without having that single company exposure that can be so damaging, Arix Bioscience is perhaps a good option. And think of it as a listed fund. They've got a hugely experienced management team that complement each other. They're targeting annual returns that are similar to the type that you'd expect from a venture capital type fund, with the liquidity of a share. And for those that are prepared to tuck them away for a few years, it could prove to be a very lucrative investment indeed.